Welcome to the HawkCast with your host, AJ Hawk.
Ryan Holiday comes back again. We were just speaking off mic. I think 2015 you came on here. Early on in my podcast, we talked about some other books you have written, the path that you have taken, your unique marketing, whatever it is. But honestly, man, I reached out to you because I listened to the book Conspiracy by Peter. What's the full title? Conspiracy, Peter Thiel, Hulk Hogan, Gawker, and the Anatomy of Intrigue.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So, first of all, it's a good title, but
thank you.
It was a bit of I guess, like a sidetrack from what you normally write about. How did you get into it? Like, how did you find this?
It was a weird story. I mean, what the book is about is this sort of incredible series of events. You have this billionaire Peter Thiel engaging in a secret, decade-long conspiracy to destroy a media outlet that had outed him as gay. So it was a story that I knew about. Obviously, I'd heard about it in the news. I didn't think I would write about it or even be able to write about it, and ended up sort of through some chance connections getting access to both Peter Thiel and Nick Denton, who was the sort of the victim of this so-called conspiracy. And I was fascinated by it, but again, I didn't think I could write about it. And the more I thought about it, I've always sort of had this attitude that you don't get any better doing the same things over and over again. You get better trying things that you're not sure you can do. And so the book was sort of this, leap off a cliff for me, and hoping that I could, come up with some way to survive before I hit the ground. And that's why I decided to do it. I just wanted to see if I could.
Now, the book is very, I guess, comprehensive. You spoke to so many different people. Did you speak to Peter Thiel and Nick Denton personally for the book?
Yeah, a bunch of times. I think I'm probably the only person on the planet who has interviewed both of them about this. It sort of came down as this very partisan story, right? There are people who think Peter Thiel is an evil villain, and there's people who think Gawker was this evil empire. And so the both parties have been very reluctant to talk to anyone because talk to anyone who isn't already their supporter, because they're worried about sort of a hit piece of some kind. And deciding to come down on this and just talk about what happened and why it happened, rather than was it a good thing or a bad thing that had happened, gave me this sort of unique access to these two people who are very unusual, very unique, and very sort of singular individuals. I'm not sure there's like a lot of people on the planet that are like Peter Thiel or like Nick Denton.
Now, do either of these guys, do they only agree to talk to you if they get final say, or they get to review the book before you publish?
No, those were my terms, is that, look, I would write about it, but they would have no say in how the book was done. Peter especially. Nick had spoken to other people about it. Peter was the sort of more reclusive one, the one with more to lose probably. And our agreement was, he wouldn't get to see a word in the book until after it had come back from the printers. So it was a leap of faith for them as well, because it could have been turned out to be very unfair or very embarrassing or anything.
Yeah, I guess you do a great job of just presenting what was happening and not taking a stance. Is it hard for you not to interject, I guess, how you feel about certain situations? There's so many twists and turns through this. For people who don't know, it all started with the Hulk Hogan sex tape, I guess, is why the litigation started. But how do you not, I guess, put your personal beliefs in there somewhere?
Yeah, it is an insane story, right? It starts because Gawker runs a stolen sex tape of Hulk Hogan, which gives Peter the chance to take his revenge. He ends up backing this lawsuit on Hulk Hogan's behalf in secret. They end up winning this $140 million judgment that bankrupts Gawker. But at every step of the way, you would sort of want to say, was this good or bad? Do I like this? Do I not like this? But what I felt is, having read all these articles about what had happened, that's all they were. There was so much judgment and so much opinion. And I think this is something that's very endemic to where we are as a society right now. Is like, you can't, like, the news used to be objective, right? And then Fox News came along and said, look, we're going to give a sort of a right-wing take on the news. And then CNN and MSNBC responded by saying, well, look, we're going to go further left, right? And so you can't turn on the news without getting hit with someone's agenda. And the result is that it's really hard to figure out, like, just what the hell is happening, right? Like you see this stuff and you just don't know, like, is this actually what happened? Is this actually as bad as it looks, or am I getting this through someone's filter? And I feel like that really costs us something, because we're not able to understand. Like, even if my take on this story was like, even if you think what Peter did was horrible and evil, you can still learn from what happened, because what he managed to pull off was incredible. I mean, how did he spend 10 years plotting this thing and nobody had any idea? I mean, it's crazy. And so what I tried to do was check myself whenever I wanted to put my opinion in, so I could present the facts. And then afterwards, we can all sit down and talk about whether it was good or bad. But I think ultimately we've got to first start with the facts.
Yeah, so Peter Thiel, he's, for people that don't know, he founded PayPal. I know he was an early investor in Facebook, and an offshoot blog from Gawker outed him as a gay man years ago. Yeah, so Peter founds PayPal, which was obviously a well-known company, but he was not by any means a celebrity. Then he puts the first $500,000 in Facebook, and he also starts a company called Palantir, which is worth about $20 billion. It's a security and intelligence a company. And so in 2007, he's this sort of unknown, mysterious figure in Silicon Valley, but very much a conservative libertarian. And Gawker finds out, and I guess some people knew this, but Gawker finds out that he is gay, and secretly gay. Is not like married with children or something, but he's gay and not publicly gay. And Gawker decides that this is something that they think they should write about. And so they write this story, and it is deeply unpleasant for Teal to have this private part of his life made public. And the article was not nice. The headline it wasn't like something in People magazine. I mean, the headline of the article is "Peter Thiel is totally gay, people." And it goes on to sort of tease him and make fun of him, not only for being gay, but for being secretive about it. And so this is Teal's sort of rude awakening to how Gawker operates, and it sets in motion this plan that eventually ends with their destruction. Yeah, that's kind of how Gawker, I guess, got their name out there, as they ran stuff that maybe other people wouldn't run. Is that, let's say, I don't know if it even matters, but if Peter Thiel is not gay and they run that, can he sue them for defamation, or how does the First Amendment work there?
Yeah, so outing someone as gay is not illegal. It may have been. It's definitely not illegal, and it's hard to sue someone over it as well. Maybe in 1950, if you were outed as gay, you might have a case that someone damaged your business by putting out this fact that other people view as negative at that time. But in 2007, you don't have much recourse if they out you as gay, true or false, right? And so that was Thiel's frustration. They'd done this thing to him that he found to be deeply unpleasant. He found it to be unethical, but it wasn't illegal. And so the next few years, he spends sort of just kind of studying this company and thinking about what he can do about it, right? It's like if somebody at your work was a real jerk, but they hadn't necessarily done anything that you could go to your boss about, and then you spent the next, several years plotting or thinking about some way to get even, or simply waiting for them to slip up. That's kind of what Thiel does from basically 2007 until 2011. So he's a very patient man.
Yeah, is that one of the things that you were most impressed by, was Peter Thiel's, I guess, his patience, his ability to take his emotion out of the situation and just kind of hang back? He does like what you would want to do as a human. Like, you know what? I'm going to sit here. I'm going to examine all the facts. I'm going to watch everything, and then I'm going to meticulously put a plan in place to get where I want to be.
Yeah, dude. Sorry. Let me hang up this stupid phone.
You're good. Is that a house phone?
Yeah, I have a house phone. I don't know why it's. So where I am out in the country, we have to have a house phone because I don't get good cell reception.
Oh yeah, you got a farm and animals and everything.
Yeah. So you're totally right. So this happens to him in 2007, and he really doesn't take the first concrete step in the conspiracy until 2011.
Did he?
And
before this, like after the article came out, was there anything from Peter Thiel or anyone around him where he said like, "Hey, forget these dudes. I don't like Gawker. I don't like what they did."
Yeah, he said he made a few comments about Gawker, which ultimately would come back to haunt him. But he really doesn't do anything, and I think that's part. He didn't. It's not like this happened in December of 2007. And by January of 2008, he knew exactly what he was going to do. He kept sort of an open mind, which I think was the first. Oftentimes we react very emotionally to things and we react immediately, right? Somebody says something rude to you in a bar and then you say something back and then they push you and you push them and then all of a sudden there's a fight, right? That's sort of the opposite of what Thiel did. He just sort of steps back and observes. And he talks to all these smart people about what his potential options are. And I think, it's hard to give someone credit for what they didn't do, but it is interesting. I mean, he's a billionaire at this time. He has essentially unlimited resources. He could have done a lot of things, right? He could have sued them, even though he knew he wasn't going to win, just to make their lives miserable, right? Mm-hmm. He could have tried to hire a private investigator to follow them around. Like, he could have done a lot of unethical or ineffective things that might have made him feel good in the moment, but likely wouldn't have accomplished what he ended up setting out to accomplish. And so, yeah, there's this period where he's sort of just waiting and watching and thinking and exploring. And that period is almost that period of kind of inaction and planning lasts almost as long as the period of actual action, which is pretty unusual.
Now, how does he reach out to Hulk Hogan after? So the Hulk Hogan sex tape alone that could just what happened with the sex tape could be its own book, where Hulk gets with his supposed best friend Bubba the Love Sponge. Terrible name for a radio DJ. He doesn't go by that anymore, does he?
No, he does, and that is his legal name.
Okay,
he legally changed his name to Bubba the Love Sponge.
Even worse. So Hulk goes over, bangs his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Bubba has cameras in the room without telling Hulk, but his wife knew about the cameras, correct?
His wife knew. So the sexual encounter is consensual in that Bubba and his wife have an open relationship. What Hogan is not informed of is that he is being secretly recorded as these encounters are happening.
And that's illegal, correct, to record?
Yeah. Yes. No one was ultimately charged for it, but you're definitely not allowed to do that.
Of course. So
right.
That's very weird. And so then, as Bubba's story goes, didn't the DVD of the footage get stolen out of his desk by somebody?
Yeah. Right. So as far as we know, a rival DJ then steals the tapes and then leaks them, not only in an attempt to embarrass Bubba, but he leaks them so then he can potentially sell the remaining tapes to Hulk Hogan to get a large payday. So the leaking of the tapes to Gawker is basically a negotiation tactic. If I tease out that there are these tapes, Hulk Hogan, this multimillionaire celebrity, is going to pay me so I don't leak the rest of them. So it's this insane story. But I think, to go to your question, how does Teal get involved in this? Well, this goes to what we were talking about earlier, the sort of the patience and the planning of it. So what Teal does in 2011, he decides that he's going to try to sue Gawker into oblivion. He's going to try to destroy them in court. So he hires sort of let's call it like a COO of the conspiracy. Like
is that Mr. A?
Yeah, he hires this guy who I refer to as Mr. A in the book to basically be his sort of operator, his man on the ground. Because
now, why can't you identify him in the book?
That was my condition. That was his condition when I interviewed him. So no one has spoken to this person besides me. Mm-hmm. And he was willing to talk about what he did, but not reveal his identity. So it was obviously a sort of a journalistic decision. I felt like it moved the book forward. But Teal hires this kid, Mr. A. Mr. A is Teal's man on the ground. And then Mr. A hires an attorney, a man named Charles Harder, a well-known Hollywood lawyer. And so they have all the pieces in place, and then they are looking for either mistakes Gawker has made in the past or waiting for them to slip up again. And so almost a year goes by before October of 2012 when Gawker runs the Hulk Hogan sex tape. So Gawker basically makes this unforced error that Teal is in a position to capitalize on, and he has his attorneys reach out to Hulk Hogan and say, hey, look, I think you have a very good case here. Would you be willing to sue Gawker? I will pay all your legal fees and help you take this as far as you want to take it. Are you willing? And that's how the conspiracy is sort of enjoined.
Okay, now how about with the questionable decision to run the sex tape by Gawker? What are the laws now with that? I remember hearing in the past, I don't know if it's changed or not, that if there's a sex tape online, then both parties have signed off on it with somebody. Is that true?
Well, a sex tape pulls up a couple different legal issues. So one is purely a copyright issue, right? Like a blog couldn't just run this video of you and I because you or I own the copyright to that, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times celebrity sex tapes, initially they're stolen and then leaked, and then the celebrity claims copyright of it, and then they go out and get taken down as a pure copyright claim. So like for instance, like if you see Kim Kardashian's sex tape online, it's because she's allowing it to be seen online and is profiting from that for the most part.
Still?
So typically,
so does she get like royalties still from that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like I believe the Kardashian sex tape is on like YouPorn and Pornhub and sites like that because she's allowed it to be, and it's one of the most viewed sex tapes of all time.
Wow. I wonder, what do you think Kanye thinks when those checks keep coming every couple months?
No, it's very weird. And so that was the weird part about the Hogan sex tape is like most people thought, and perhaps Gawker thought this at the time, just assumed that obviously he was okay with it, that this was some money-making venture. And so the complicated part of this one is that they couldn't get it taken down purely on a copyright claim because who owns the copyright, right? Is it Hulk Hogan who's in the tape? Or is it his best friend who recorded it without his consent? And so originally the copyright claim was somewhat shaky. So they end up, Teal's lawyers end up suing Gawker, not just on the copyright claim, but on an invasion of privacy and an intentional infliction of emotional distress claim. So the argument was, is this tape newsworthy, and do you have a right to publish something that is so private and so personal and was not done with the person's consent? And so the fact that this case was filed and then ultimately litigated in a small county in Florida is sort of the critical variable. That basically the argument was, per the Florida state constitution, you don't have a right to run this tape, whereas maybe a federal court judge, and in fact a federal court judge in a related part of this, did say Gawker did have the right to publish it. So it's a bunch of legal technicalities that Teal and his team were smart enough to catch and focus on, rather than say trying to litigate the, are you allowed to out me as gay or not, which was probably a losing case. They found this sort of obscure, sensational winning case in Hulk Hogan.
So has Nick Denton, obviously he founded Gawker, or AJ
Yes.
Delario, the editor, have either of them admitted that they were wrong in running the tape?
It's complicated. I think they have come to see that obviously it was mistaken purely by the fact that they ended up losing a $140 million verdict against it. I think they're conflicted. I think on the one hand they have come to understand that Hulk Hogan really was hurt by it and really didn't want this to be seen, and that perhaps there is a line between what's private and public. But I also think that they believe that there was real journalistic merit in this. Hulk Hogan is a well-known public figure. He was a well-known sort of American hero, widely considered to be a good guy. And here these journalists come in possession of a tape of him having sex with his best friend's wife. There's an argument to be made that is in the public's interest to know about. I mean, this is a guy that had a reality television show where he presented himself as the all-American husband and father. And then here he is doing this thing that, certainly is not being the all-American husband and father. And so that would be the journalistic argument for running it. I think ultimately what the jury was swayed by and what Teal's team argued was, you can write about this all you want because it is a fact, but do you have the right to run video of me doing this, right? You're a public figure, right? You've been on television, you have this podcast. If you are in a changing room at a clothing store and someone is illegally recording it, does the public have a right to know what you are doing in that room? Probably not. And that was the argument that Thiel, I think, made to those ordinary jurors in Florida that they were so convinced by.
Yeah, wasn't it also was it Delorio? Did they both take the stand, Delorio and Nick Denton?
But both of them took the stand, yeah.
Now, which one I get them confused, thinking one of them completely was awful.
Well, they both did it. They both did quite terrible.
Super arrogant, weren't they? Just super arrogant and felt like they man, they have no chance against us, and they just seemed so dismissive.
They were, and also there's this matter of a deposition. So they were both deposed early on in the case. So in 2013, they were deposed on videotape when they definitely thought that this case had no potential. So in that deposition, AJ Delario, who's the editor who ran the story, is asked, he says, celebrity sex tapes are inherently newsworthy. I'm going to run them. And then the attorney says, are there any celebrity sex tapes that you would say are not newsworthy that you would not run? And he said, well, perhaps if the celebrity was a child. And then the lawyer said, well, how young? Like how young? What would be your cutoff? And he said, I don't know, 4 years old. And I'm not sure if he was he was not being totally serious. Like I've met AJ. I've known him for some time. I am very certain that he would not run a sex tape of a 5-year-old, right? Like I know that he wouldn't do that, but that was a very dumb thing to say when you are under oath in a $100 million lawsuit. And so when that video is played back to the jury in 2016, they were obviously horrified. And you could argue that clip may have been the nail in Gawker's coffin.
And I think the nail in the coffin when it comes to his public persona and what the public thinks about him. Is the video of that deposition out?
Yeah, you can watch it. Okay. It's pretty terrible.
Yeah, and right there, the court of public opinion is never going to be on that guy's side. Of course, he was being sarcastic and joking, and he was very arrogant in what he was doing. But right there, I feel like is the nail in your coffin when you say that. You show it to some jurors, especially in some smaller county courthouse down in Florida. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Like, who's going to be on his side?
Right. And those 6 jurors, they're not on the Supreme Court. They don't care that much about the First Amendment. Their job is to go, look, we have Hulk Hogan over here who's telling us how embarrassed and hurt he was by running this tape. And then over here we have this guy who said he would run a sex tape of a 4-year-old. Who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? And I think what Hogan did is, look, as a professional wrestler, Hogan knows how to work a room, right? He's been a celebrity for like 40 years. He knows how to present himself and get people to root for him. And so, he showed himself as the good guy, and Gawker was the heel, to use the wrestling term, and the jury sided with Hulk Hogan overwhelmingly so.
Did Delorio? I assume he had a lawyer with him for that deposition, right?
He did, and just none of them were taking it seriously. They believed that there was no chance that this case would go to trial. And that's something that people don't quite understand about the media. Obviously the First Amendment is incredibly important, and journalists do very important work. I would say particularly now in our sort of chaotic political environment. However, the media often abuses its own power, right? So what if the media wrote a grossly inaccurate story about you, right? They said that you were addicted to cocaine and you didn't pay your bills. And they just said all these things that were horribly untrue, right? You would have, theoretically, you have recourse to sue them for libel and defamation, right? Mm-hmm. But if someone accuses you of something horribly embarrassing, the last thing that, first off, are you going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars getting them to admit they were wrong? That's not usually a good use of anyone's time or money. And then secondarily, if you're embarrassed by what they said, the last thing you want to do is give more attention to those accusations by filing a public lawsuit about them. And so what Gawker did oftentimes was know, like, look, what we're doing here, running this story or posting this video clip, it might be in a legal gray area, but chances are no one's going to call us out for it because it's too expensive and too embarrassing. And so they exploited that, and I think that's what they thought was going to happen with Hulk Hogan.
Now, yeah, that goes to like the bigger picture that Peter Thiel was trying to do. Now, saying, as you said, how the journalists can take advantage of that, because you're right. If someone runs a story like that and says you're addicted to coke, you touch kids, you're crazy, well, that one you probably would fight if they told you you're a pedophile. Yeah. I think
maybe
you'll drain your bank account for that one.
Sure.
But let's just say they run a crazy story about how I'm a drug addict and whatever. You're right. I go sit down with a lawyer and say, hey, what are my options? They say, okay, we can sue for libel and defamation, but not only is this going to cost you a ton of money, but at some point when you sue for defamation, don't you have to be deposed by their lawyers at the same time?
Yeah, you not only have to be deposed, it takes an incredible amount of your time. They get to run discovery. So let's say, again, we'll use this Coke example. They accuse you of being a Coke addict. Well, that you sue them, they're gonna make you prove that you're not a Coke addict, right? So they're gonna get to crawl through your life, through your email. They're gonna get to turn your life upside down to do this. And so it might be proven that you're not a Coke addict, but maybe there's something else in your private life that you don't want them to know about that might end up coming out as far as a trial is concerned. So not only is there all that, but then on top of that, juries tend to side with media companies. So your lawyer is going to tell you it's going to cost a ton of money. They're going to get to depose you. They're going to get to turn your whole life upside down. And by the way, you're probably still going to lose, even if they're 100% in the wrong. Almost only a crazy person or someone with unlimited resources is going to say, yeah, I'll take that fight. And that's really what Teal did. I mean, in retrospect, people have said, well, look, this is very alarming that a billionaire spent all this money to destroy a media outlet. But the other interesting side of things is that Hulk Hogan couldn't have afforded to win this case on his own. So this case that Hulk Hogan eventually got in front of a jury and got this $140 million verdict cost between $10 and $20 million to litigate. So Hulk Hogan could not have afforded to fight the case that he ultimately ended up winning. And so I guess the argument is, who was the big guy abusing their power? Was it the billionaire who wrote a blank check to fight a media outlet? Or was it the media outlet who knew they could write anything and everything about people because no one could actually afford to fight them on it?
Well, isn't that the big reason Peter Thiel did this? Because just to give him a check the media basically and say, I'm sure, yes, you guys have a job to do. I understand that, but you're abusing your power, because unless the perfect storm comes along, like Peter Thiel secretly backing Hulk Hogan, nobody else is going to take that fight in the many years of litigation and, as you said, the tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's been some interesting cases since, right? During the 2016 campaign, Melania Trump was accused in a Daily Mail article of being a prostitute, of having been a prostitute. And so that's a good example of one of the, if somebody accuses you of being a prostitute, do you want to, even if that's totally untrue, do you want to then file a lawsuit that argues about whether you're a prostitute or not? And so ultimately the same lawyer who represented Hogan in this case ended up taking on that case, and they did win. But it's very unusual that that happens because, again, people are intimidated. People are reluctant to spend all this money. And I think that was one of Thiel's look, I would say it's probably his motivation was 50% selfish, like 50% wanting to get revenge, and then 50% this sort of larger altruistic motivation of, hey, what these people are doing is not right, and I have the wealth and resources to be able to address that, and I'm going to give it a shot.
Now, could you see Peter Thiel doing this again for somebody else secretly and backing somebody?
I don't know if he would do this particular thing again, but I would say that, to have pulled this thing off that no one thought could be pulled off, there's no way that he doesn't take away from that a sort of a deeper confidence and a motivation to try other crazy things. I think Thiel, what's interesting is like we all think that like if you were suddenly tomorrow a billionaire, you would think that you would be different than everyone else, that you would be this sort of eccentric billionaire, right? But the truth is most of us wouldn't, right? Most of us wouldn't. And I think Thiel and Elon Musk are sort of these very different characters in that they've become extraordinarily wealthy and successful. And instead of that making them more conservative, it's made them sort of more eccentric and unique. And they've taken these risks on some of these, very big gambles. And I'm not sure it's always for the best, but they seem to be generally sort of sincere about it.
Yeah. So what's Peter Thiel doing now? What does his day-to-day look like? Do you know?
Well, I mean, he ended up backing Trump in the 2016 election, so he's been an advisor to the president. He runs these very large companies. He's on the board of Facebook. He's invested in everything from Airbnb to Lyft to SpaceX. I think he's just sort of living the life of the extraordinary 0.00001%. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world, and I think he's trying to use that wealth and power to shape the world in the direction that he wants it to go in. Again, we're probably going to disagree over whether that's the right direction, but I think he sees himself as a sort of a benevolent influence in the universe.
Now, on the flip side, what about Denton and Delorio of Gawker? What are they up to?
AJ is the more interesting case, right? AJ may have run a large media outlet, but was not, I think at the time of the trial, his net worth was negative $27,000. Like he had no assets. He had only student loans. He was not doing well. He had a drug problem, a drinking problem, not doing well. Things had not gone well for him since that article happened. But since the verdict, there was a sort of a dicey period where it was going to be determined how much of the verdict he was responsible for. He's ended up, he's gone into recovery. He's sober now. He has a family. He sort of turned his life around. I think he's still figuring out what he's going to do next, but he's very much turned his life around, which I think is an unexpected twist in the story. And then Nick Denton walked away with, he lost control of his $300 million company. Gawker was sold off and the site was bankrupt. He took away a certain amount of money from it, and this was Thiel's intention. Thiel did not want to create a sort of a desperate, impoverished enemy who had to get revenge on him for having gotten revenge. So Denton walked away with, several $1 million, and obviously it had already done well in the past. So he's just sort of traveling the world. It's an interesting thing. He kind of got away. Not got away with it, but it's not like he's in jail or something. He's certainly paid for his sins, but is still out there in the world.
Now I know Hulk Hogan won $140 million settlement, but he doesn't get anywhere near that money, does he?
Right. He won $140 million verdict, which is very different than what you ultimately ended up getting paid. The case settles for something around $30 million.
What does that mean? So after the verdict comes in, then both sides just come together and say, hey, we can't give you 140, we'll give you 10, and then they negotiate to 30 or 40?
Sort of. It's like, look, we're probably never going to, we don't have $140 million. So we're going to declare bankruptcy. And then we're going to fight you for years in court. We're going to appeal the verdict. We're going to fight you over every expense. We're going to burn as much of, let's say we have $80 million. We're going to burn as much of that as we possibly can, so you never see a penny of it. That's sort of the implicit threat. And so they end up coming to this settlement for about $30 million. And then Hogan is now like one of the largest creditors to Gawker. So if from the sale of the estate, you know, like the domain name, Gawker.com, someone's going to buy that at some point. If it sells for $1 million, Hulk Hogan gets like 500,000. Like he gets, if they sell the office chairs at Gawker, you know, like Hogan would get the proceeds of that. So it's a very weird story. It's mostly wound down, but it's still like, you know, here or there, little things will come up. But basically the end result was Hogan got many millions of dollars. The lawyers got paid every dollar of their invoices because Peter picked up the tab, and then Gawker no longer exists.
Does Hulk get to keep that money, or does, even though Peter Thiel is a billionaire, does he say, hey, no, that's my 30 mil?
No. Teal's agreement was, I won't take any of the money. You would get whatever you would win. And you know, Hogan was not the only case that he'd backed. He'd backed several other cases, not necessarily knowing early on that Hogan's case would be the sort of knockout blow. So the arrangement was like, look, we're going to fund as many legitimate lawsuits as we can. The idea being maybe we'll win 10 million here and 8 million here and 100,000 here. And eventually we'll sort of wear them down. It just happened that the Hogan case ended up being such a enormous blunder on Gawker's behalf that they were able to win this enormous judgment.
Are you aware of the Erin Andrews case, the peephole situation? What year? Do you remember what year that was?
So I don't remember when the video was recorded, but believe it or not, the Erin Andrews verdict happened during the Gawker trial. So they ended up going to trial at essentially the exact same time. And I believe she won something like $50 million.
Now, did that come to a settlement, or does she get 50 mil?
That one was settled, and I believe she walked away with a pretty significant amount of money. I don't know her arrangement with her attorneys. So the big distinction in these cases is, are you paying the lawyer by the hour, or have you signed what's called a contingency agreement, in which case they get to take a large percentage of the judgment if you are successful. What Teal did is Teal paid for the lawyers and said, the client, you get to keep whatever you win.
So it's the perfect situation for Hulk Hogan.
It's basically all upside for Hulk Hogan to almost an alarming degree, right? Hogan could have settled the case at any time. Gawker offered him as much as $10 million, and had he taken that, Gawker might still be in business today.
That's what's amazing throughout the book. As it's going along, you see that Gawker finally gets a little bit scared, or I should say a little. They start to see the reality of where this is going and how hard they're fighting it, and they start offering him settlements. And even Hulk Hogan goes back and forth. I believe he was remarried at the time. Was he remarried by then?
And he did.
And I feel like his wife at one point told him to take it, whatever one of the settlements were, and Hulk had to go back and forth. Was it ultimately Peter Thiel's decision whether they took it or not?
It was Hogan's decision, and that's what's so interesting about it, is that Gawker had been so awful to Hulk Hogan and had abused him so much during the course of the trial that he didn't ultimately want to settle. So he could have taken that $10 million. He would have got $10 million in cash and could have walked away with it. But he passes on it mostly because he's so angry and he so wants to punish these people who have humiliated him. And I think that was a fundamental miscalculation that Gawker made. They just assumed, look, eventually he'll tap out. Eventually, either the number will get too high and he'll have to take it, or he'll be too humiliated and embarrassed and have to walk away. And I think they underestimated him. They thought that since professional wrestling is fake, obviously, he's weak and soft, and that's, I don't think, the case.
How did they not at any point throughout the whole process get any kind of inkling that Peter Thiel was backing him?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I think they didn't want to see. They were so focused on, they'd so underestimated Hulk Hogan that the idea that there was more to the story doesn't occur to them. And then also I think, and this is a good lesson, is that they didn't want to seem crazy. So even if they did suspect that there might be some sort of mysterious backer, to be able to go out and say that sounds dumb, right? Like we don't think highly of people who believe in conspiracy theories, right? We think they're crazy. Mm-hmm. And I think Gawker, and Gawker sort of admitted this after, they were like, look, we didn't want to be seen as conspiracy theorists, but it's not a theory if it's actually happening, right? And so I think they were blind to it, and then also sort of caught in their own self-image, and that made it hard for them to see what was happening.
Yeah, throughout, it just amazes me that Peter Thiel was able to pull this off. But why does he have to be secret? Why did he feel the need to stay behind the scenes?
Well, if you look at what happened after, it makes total sense. As soon as Thiel, like when Hogan triumphed over Gawker, most people were rooting for Hogan. They said Gawker was the big guy and Hulk Hogan was the underdog. As soon as it became clear that he'd been backed by a billionaire, then Gawker became the underdog and Hogan and Teal became the villains. And so I think if from day one you knew that Hulk Hogan was being supported by a billionaire with unlimited resources, he would appear much less sympathetic. So I think part of it was a perception and a positioning issue. Part of it may have been that a judge might have thrown the case out, or a judge may have forced Teal to become a plaintiff in the case. And then that would have opened Teal up to various kinds of discovery and all the things he was trying to avoid. So I think there's a number of reasons for it. But look, I think it worked because it was secret. And if it had not been secret, I'm not sure he would have won, at least to the same level.
And how did it get out that Peter Thiel backed him after the verdict came down?
He just told one too many people. He had slowly told people, for almost a decade, he'd been totally secret about it. And then, it accumulates. You tell one person and then you tell another person. And then the next thing you know, 25 or 30 people know. And that's just too many to keep a secret. And so eventually it did come out.
That's one reason where I have a hard time believing the majority of all conspiracies that people like to throw out there. Now, I understand there's all kinds of stuff the government does that we can't know about, we shouldn't know about, sure, whatever. But some of the crazy conspiracies that people think will happen, and a lot of times I'm like, hey, you have like 1,500 people involved in this conspiracy you're pitching to me. You can't keep one person quiet. Like, it's almost impossible. Some guy's going to tell his wife's telling her friend, and it's on Facebook, and we're out there. And it's funny that Peter Thiel just told one too many people after being such a calculated and guy that had this whole plan in place. But then, of course, at some point you are a human and you want to tell, like, you feel good about what you did. You took down, you really made a dent in this whole culture that you felt was going the wrong way.
That's totally right. I mean, this case was a lawyer, Hulk Hogan, Peter Thiel, and this guy, Mr. A. So let's call that like 4 people, right? And eventually it got out, right? They were not able to keep that a secret. So imagine, the argument that like 9/11 was an inside job, right? Like, how many people would that have required to pull off? Hundreds, thousands? The idea that not one of them has come forward and said, look, George Bush asked me to do this, is absurd, right? So it obviously didn't happen, or the Kennedy assassination or whatever. The other one I tell in the book is a few years ago, J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, wrote a book under a pseudonym. She didn't want to use her real name because she wanted the book to be seen as its distinct book. So she wrote it as if she was a man. So obviously her lawyer knew about it, and her lawyer told a friend whose wife told a bunch of people over dinner, and then somebody tweeted it out. And again, that's like a very minor conspiracy where the stakes are extraordinarily low. So the idea that, there are these complicated conspiracies, this deep state that's controlling everything, is just I just don't think possible but one of the reasons that I wanted to tell the story of this conspiracy is to show people how conspiracies actually work, so we could learn something about it, and then we could realize, okay, there's probably not these enormous ones happening, but there might be little ones that involve just a handful of people that really can shape and change the entire world.
Now, going to something you were speaking of earlier, when you give something attention, can you explain the Streisand effect?
Oh, right. So this goes to why a lot of celebrities don't sue things. And there's something called the Streisand Effect, which goes to this thing that happened early in the internet history. Somebody posted a photo of Barbra Streisand's house. This is I believe in the early 90s online. And Barbra Streisand said, "Hey, that's my house. I don't want people to know where I live." And so she sued to get this photo taken down. It was a big lawsuit. But the result is that the photo gets distributed everywhere, and it becomes so well known that it's impossible for it to ever come down. And so this is now called the Streisand Effect, which is basically that if you try to take something off the internet, it becomes more well known and is in fact counterproductive. So again, if somebody hacked your cell phone and found a naked photo of you and you sued to get it taken down, the reason that would not work is that tomorrow TMZ, the headline would be, AJ Hawk is suing to get these photos taken off the internet, and even more people would see them.
What if it's a conspiracy and I was the one that leaked that picture because I felt pretty confident in that picture, and I felt fluffed it up. I was like, this is good, man.
Yeah.
And I had my buddy leak it out, and I didn't have any attachment, and then I came out super pissed.
Well, see, that's what people thought Hulk Hogan was doing. They thought he's pretending that this tape was recorded without his consent, but actually he was doing it because it would reinvigorate his career, and that the lawsuit is just a publicity stunt. And so I think that's partly why Gawker didn't take it seriously. For the first year, maybe they thought it was a publicity stunt, and they didn't realize that he was deadly serious.
Had they not seen the full tape, or was that before? Because a lot of other the sex tape, sure, very embarrassing. But what Hulk said killed him much worse. There was racist comments he said throughout that at some point in the video that couldn't have been out yet when they were still thinking that, correct?
So there's 3 tapes, and Gawker only got access to one of them, and they didn't know about what was on the other tapes.
Okay. Did those come out? When did the other ones come out to where those were very damning? I know Hulk.
Yeah, he made a lot of racist comments, and
I think that's the hardest thing to repair. Like the sex tape, the vast majority of Americans, especially, don't care at all that you have a sex tape. Wow, that's kind of weird.
Right.
Your buddy's wife, all right, but the racist comments, that's what's hard to come back from.
Yeah, and so those racist comments don't become known to the public until the summer of 2015. So it's not until 3 years later. But that's again one of the Hogan must have known as he was fighting this lawsuit and as he was turning down these settlement offers that eventually it's going to come out. And he was he was so determined to win that. And I asked him about this. I said, you had to have known. And he said, I didn't care. He's like, it was more important to me to shut them down, to prevent them from, doing tapes like this to other people, that I was willing to take that heat. And I think Gawker thought when those tapes came out that Hogan would have to quit, that he'd have to drop the lawsuit, and he didn't, which was, pretty unbelievable.
Can you explain quickly before I wrap this up, what happened when Hulk was he sent into a hotel room in some weird situation where he was wearing a wire? What happened there? Yes.
So again, the story is just unreal from start to finish.
Yeah.
So in 2012, right after the tapes have been leaked and the Gawker case has been filed, Hogan gets this mysterious email that says, "Hey, I possess the other tapes. Would you like to buy them from me?" And the contact is from a man named Keith M. Davidson, who is a lawyer in Los Angeles, who was representing the person who's claimed to possess the tapes. So Hogan ends up contacting the FBI, and they say, "Oh, sure, we'll buy the tapes from you, but it's really a sting to catch the person who stole the tapes. This happens in Florida. They do the exchange. the lawyer says, look, this is my business. I help people do this. And he's like, I've done this to lots of celebrities, and we'll get back to that in a second. The FBI is in the other room. They're recording the whole thing. They burst in with guns drawn, and that's sort of the end of it. No charges ended up being filed, but they did end up getting possession of the other tapes back. But here's the incredible thing. That lawyer, Keith M. Davidson, who the FBI arrested in December of 2012 but did not prosecute, would go on to represent a woman named Stormy Daniels, who had an affair with Donald Trump and then approached him and asked to be paid off for her silence. So this whole insane story involves this cast of characters that would go on to be involved in all sorts of other, insane things that you could hardly believe actually happened.
Wow. That and obviously that came out after your book was published, wasn't it? That he represented Stormy.
Yeah. This just came out, a few months ago. And then the other twist, so on the one hand, you have that lawyer who represented Stormy Daniels, and now Charles Harder, who represented Hulk Hogan, now represents Donald Trump.
Man, you get yourself involved with some characters. I love it.
I know. It was a fascinating book to write, but it was also scary. I mean, not all these people are nice people, and not all of them are making the world a better place. That's for sure.
Yeah. Do you ever get worried about that? I mean, when you're dealing with, there's a lot of people that aren't nice but don't have the power or the money to do anything about it. But when you deal with people that are cold-blooded and they have a lot of cash, or they have people that they know with a lot of cash, they can make your life a living hell.
Yeah, look, I did think about it a lot, and then I sort of ultimately decided that, like, all I can do is not think about it, right? Like, my job is to write things and not think about the consequences. And in a way, I kind of empathize with Gawker, right? Like, their job is to, if you get a scoop of a celebrity having sex with his best friend's wife, your job as the editor of a website is to publish it. It's not to think about, hey, in 5 years, is there going to be a lawsuit about this, right? And so, yeah, you realize that people are kind of doing their jobs and trying to be, brave despite any worries or anxieties they have, and they don't always make the right decision. So it was certainly the scariest of all. I mean, most of my books are about people who have been dead for thousands of years. So this was definitely different for me and alarming. And look, to even write about Peter Thiel, a guy who spent $10 million destroying a media outlet, that kept me up at night as well.
Yeah, it's like Billy Madison. Boy, am I glad I called that guy when he's sniping people.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, when Hulk was meeting in that hotel room to get these other two tapes, did the guy say that I didn't make copies? This is it?
Well, so that was the interesting thing, is that, like, in the sting, their job was just to get the guy to give them the tapes. Their job was not to question whether this would actually be a good idea or not, right? But yeah, of course. I mean, the idea of buying the tapes is ridiculous because the guy could just have copies of it. Although part of the agreement was like, okay, we'll give you they purchased the tapes for $300,000, and it was like $150,000 up front, and then like $50,000 in 9 months. There was like a payment schedule to keep them from leaking, but inevitably they did end up leaking, right? Like the racist stuff did end up coming out, and it may have been from those exact people. So we'll never know.
Wow. All right, man. Well, thank you. It's fascinating. For people that haven't read the book, I listened to it, and you read it. It was your voice, man.
Did.
You did good. I had to take.
You've heard me talk way too much.
Forever. I know it's a brutal gig. How many days was that?
I think it was 5 days. Wow. Like 4 or 5 hours a day. It's brutal.
Are you going to do that? Will you read the next one?
I think so. I mean, fans seem to like it. It's just brutal to do.
Do they still screw you on the New York Times bestseller list for Audible books?
Audible books don't count for the New York Times bestseller list.
Why?
I don't know, but like, look, ebooks didn't count for the New York Times bestseller list until like 3 years ago. So it's a ridiculous system.
Just a matter of time, I guess. Before. So, all right, man. Well, thank you. Yeah, I know you got a lot of stuff going on. You got a 40-acre farm got to go milk the goats and trim the sheep, or do whatever you got to do.
I don't do either of those things, but yes.
Someone will, maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, Ryan. Thanks a lot, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. See you.
We're glad you could join us for today's conversation. After you subscribe to the show, head over to thehawkcast.com or reach out to AJ directly on Twitter at @officialAJHawk to recommend future guests that will help us inspire people to keep talking. Thanks again, and we look forward to speaking with you next time on the HawkCast.